Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. The stillness of the night was as smooth as velvet and used to soothe Samuel's soul. Tonight, however, the stillness was different. It was no longer a reassuring embrace, but rather like a suffocating blanket. The gentle flow of Miles Davis's jazz music, which on weekdays was the soundtrack to his peaceful evenings, seemed to taunt him with every sound at the moment as if it echoed through the growing emptiness inside him. He sat on the flagstone terrace of his spacious suburban home, the amber liquid in his tall glass capturing the fading twilight, transforming it into a miniature, swirling sunset. Usually, this ritual of evening sips, accompanied by the gentle clinking of ice cubes, signaled his release from the relentless pressures of the day's work into the serenity of the night. But tonight was different, and an inexplicable unease surged through Samuel's mind. He raised his glass and sipped, the spicy whiskey sliding down his throat but unable to dispel the gloom. Through the wide floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see his wife Ellie busy in the kitchen. She hummed a little song as she moved lightly between the kitchen counter and the dining table, her long blonde-brown hair swaying gently as she moved with her usual skill and grace. At the table, his best friend, or Jack, who he once considered his best friend, was leaning against the bar, idly playing with a beer bottle in his hand, his trademark, slightly cynical smile on his face. As Ellie turned to get her things, Jack followed her with an almost obsessive look, then grinned as if he'd found something funny, revealing a mouthful of neat white teeth. They are the two most important and trusted people in Samuel's life. Ellie, his wife and partner of 18 years of married life, they met in college and have weathered the storms together to build this cozy home. Jack, a brother he'd known since his college days, could almost be considered family. Between the three of them, they had countless relaxing evenings like this one, watching movies together, talking, drinking, and sharing each other's lives. Ellie seemed to notice Samuel's gaze as she put down the dishes she was holding and walked gracefully out of the kitchen and onto the patio. The coolness of the night brushed against her face, but she didn't seem to care. "Hey, honey," she whispered, her voice as sweet as honey. "Why are you hiding out here drinking alone? The movie's about to start. Come on in." Jack followed suit, his tall frame almost blocking the light off the porch. "Yeah, man. Don't stand us up like last time. Every movie night you disappear in the middle of it, making it look like you don't love us anymore." Samuel laughed and shook his head, taking another sip of his whiskey. "Nah, I'm just enjoying the rare peace and quiet. Well, I'll come in and see what great movie you guys have chosen." He got up, set his glass on the table, and followed Ellie and Jack into the house. Ellie took his arm, as she always did naturally, and leaned against his side, smelling faintly of vanilla and another unnameable, unique scent that belonged only to her. A warmth swept through Samuel's heart as he thought he might be being overly sensitive, or maybe just tired from work. They sat around the wide couch in the living room, Ellie snuggling up to Samuel, her head resting gently on his shoulder. Jack had taken over the other end of the couch with his legs stretched out in an attitude of ownership. The coffee table was filled with all kinds of snacks and drinks, a habit they had formed over the years, and every movie night, they were bound to have a whole bunch of food and drinks ready, even if they simply couldn't finish them in the end. The movie begins, an action thriller that Ellie picked out. But Samuel's mind was not on the movie at all, and he watched it with one eye on it while his mind kept going back to what he had just seen. He began to notice details that he had never noticed before. For example, the eye contact between Ellie and Jack seems too frequent and too taciturn. For example, Jack always likes to touch Ellie intentionally or unintentionally when he jokes, and Ellie doesn't seem to resent it, but instead returns an even brighter smile. Then again, the conversations between the two of them were always characterized by an ineffable intimacy, an intimacy that seemed to transcend the boundaries of friendship. At one point, Ellie got up to get a drink, and Jack's eyes stuck to her like glue until she disappeared into the kitchen doorway. Those eyes, hot, greedy, full of undisguised possessiveness. Samuel's heart sank as a chill rose from the soles of his feet and instantly traveled throughout his body. He forced himself to look away from the flickering images on the screen, but his mind kept replaying what he had just seen like a movie and the clues that he had once ignored. "Have you ever thought about how lucky you are?" Jack spoke suddenly, interrupting Samuel's thoughts. He stretched exaggeratedly and rested his hands behind his head in a hangdog manner. Lucky. Samuel raised an eyebrow and asked with mock relief, "Oh, tell me about it." Jack grinned and took a sip of his beer. "Sure, man. You've got a nice house, a successful career, a wife who's devoted to you, and kids. Well, they're pretty bearish sometimes, but they're still kids." He paused, a hint of undetectable acidity in his tone. "There are some people who will do anything for what you have." Samuel laughed and shook his head. "Come on, you guys. I've worked hard for all this. It's not like you don't know that." Jack raises his beer bottle and motions to Samuel. I know, but you still have time for humble brags." Samuel smiled, an easy, genuine smile, because he believed in him, and he believed that his life was something to be envied. Ellie returned and handed Samuel a fresh glass of whiskey before resuming her seat beside him. She kissed his cheek, slightly longer than usual for a second. "I love you," she whispered. Samuel kissed her forehead and smiled. "I love you too, baby." Another lie, another sham. He didn't know it then, but his world was beginning to disintegrate. When the movie was over, Jack got up to take his leave. He waved his hand lazily. "Well, you two keep on loving each other. I'll leave you alone." Ellie rolled her eyes. "Good night, Jack." Samuel patted Jack on the shoulder and walked him to the door. "See you tomorrow, bro." Jack gave a meaningful smile. "Of course." Samuel locked the door and turned to see Ellie standing in the center of the living room, looking at him silently, her eyes complex and inscrutable. "Tired?" she asked softly, a hint of exhaustion in her voice. Samuel walked over and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. "Yeah, it's been a bit of a busy day at work." Ellie sighed and leaned her body back slightly, snuggling into his arms. "Get some early rest then." Samuel kissed her hair and felt her body heat as an unspeakable sadness welled up in his heart. He suddenly realized that he was such a stranger to the woman he had shared his bed with for 18 years. They went upstairs together, into the bedroom, into the life they had built together, into the perfect lie. As Ellie lies down beside him, her breathing gradually becoming steady and gentle, Samuel feels not peace, not doubt, not questioning, only love. But love built on deception is nothing more than a castle in the air, waiting for the wind to blow, and soon, the storm will come. One evening a few days later, Samuel finished work early and drove home. He intends to surprise Ellie, but finds out that he is the one who is surprised. He hadn't meant to come back early, it was just that, ghostly, he'd left his cell phone at the office, and by the time he'd remembered, he'd already driven a long way out. He hesitated for a moment, intending to pick it up the next day, but he always felt a little uneasy in his heart, as if something was about to happen. So he turned the car around and drove back. Thinking about it now, he would have preferred that he hadn't gone back then. Or maybe it was just fate's way of letting him witness the brutal truth with his own eyes. When he pulled into the driveway, the house was quiet, only the porch light still on, the soft light spilling out into the yard, creating a cozy atmosphere. This was his home, the home he and Ellie had built together, where they had raised their children and spent countless wonderful nights. This is his kingdom, his haven. Samuel got out of the car and gently closed the door. The night was surprisingly quiet, broken only by the chirping of crickets in the distance. He walked to the door and was about to open it when he suddenly stopped. He heard Jack's voice, that familiar, low chuckle, coming through the doorway. Samuel's heart skipped a beat as a sense of foreboding surged through him. He'd been gone for hours, and assuming they'd be wrapping up their usual movie night, Jack should have been home long ago. But he didn't. They're still here, alone in his house. Holding his breath, he cautiously approached the door of the room and pressed his ear against it. He heard Ellie's laugh, soft, flirtatious, with a hint of pout he'd never heard before. A sense of foreboding surged through me. "I can't believe you kept this from him for so long. The house, the company, even me." Jack's voice was full of smugness and mockery. "He held you like a treasure and ended up raising a bunch of white wolves." Ellie giggled, her tone playful but with a hint of viciousness. "So what? He's still smug and thinks he's the most amazing man in the world." Samuel only felt a heavenly spin as he gripped the key in his hand so tightly that the sharp metal edges were deeply embedded in his palm, but he couldn't feel a single ounce of pain. His heartbeat was as deafening as a beating drum, and his breathing became rapid and difficult. Part of him, some naive, desperate part, wanted to believe it was just a harmless joke, a joke that went too far. Dude doesn't have a clue. I'm the real dad. What a loser. Raising my kids and paying my bills, man. I should send him a thank you card. The room echoed with sickening laughter, as if it were a sharp knife stabbing hard into Samuel's heart. No, 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 it's not possible. It's not true. 18 years, 18 whole years. The best 18 years of his life had turned out to be an outright lie. All those memories of his children, all those cozy family times, all those things he had been so proud of, turned out to be based on a scam so ugly, so disgusting. Samuel felt a wave of vertigo and he stumbled, almost falling. He braced himself to stand still, gripping the doorknob so tightly that his knuckles were white from the effort. His mind was in chaos, with all sorts of thoughts frantically coming to him, making it almost impossible for him to think. He wanted to rush in, grab Jack by the collar, and question him for an explanation. He wanted to grab Ellie by the shoulders and shake her so she'd tell him none of this was real. There were so many things he wanted to do, but he couldn't do anything. It was then that he heard a voice that broke his heart even more, a voice that he never thought would betray him. Just don't be stupid, Ellie. Keep up the act. He's been good to you. There's no need to ruin what we have. It was his mother, Martha. Samuel felt a wave of nausea, and he almost threw up. Even she, even his own mother, knew. She looked him in the eye year after year and let him live in ignorance. His body trembled violently, but this time, it wasn't out of sadness, but out of anger, a deep, bone-deep, biting anger. This anger, like lava, raced through his veins, searing every nerve, every cell. However, he didn't move, not yet. He took a slow, shuddering breath and forced himself backward. One step, 2 steps, until he retreated to the door, under the porch that had once made him feel safe and warm. He closed the door gently without making a sound, as if even this house was ashamed of what was happening inside. He stood there, his body shivering violently, but he couldn't feel a trace of cold. His mind went blank. There was only anger, boundless anger, like a tsunami, drowning him completely. He's betrayed. Not just betrayed, he's screwed. They took everything from him. His love, his loyalty, his trust, and turned it into their own personal joke. They thought he was a fool. They thought he would roll over and accept it, become the weak, confused husband they had portrayed him as for nearly 2 decades. They don't know what's going to happen next. He took a deep breath to calm himself. Revenge wasn't just a fleeting thought. It wasn't anger clouding his judgment. It was a necessity. He wiped his face and let out a bitter laugh. They want to make a fool out of him. They wanted to laugh at him behind his back. Okay. He was going to make sure they regretted every single day for the rest of their miserable lives. He turned and walked toward the car parked in the driveway, each step firm and strong. He's not the same Samuel he used to be. The naive, kind, easily trusting Samuel is dead, dead in that hypocritical, lie-filled house. Now, standing in front of them is a brand new Samuel, one that is cold, ruthless, and filled with a desire for revenge. As he got into his car and started the engine, he took one last look at the house that had once held all his happiness and hopes, and now it was just an empty shell, a cage, a tomb that had imprisoned him for 18 years of his youth. He laughed coldly, then. He stepped on the gas and left without looking back. He's going to make them pay. He's going to make life worse for them. He wanted them to realize that betraying him was the biggest mistake they had ever made in their lives. The car, like a departing arrow, disappeared into the dreary night, leaving the house, once a symbol of happiness and contentment, standing alone, like a huge, empty joke. Samuel pressed the gas pedal to the floor and the engine let out an angry roar, as if venting his anger for him. He didn't know where he was going or what he was supposed to do. All he knew was that he had to get away. Away from this place of lies and betrayal. away from the woman who had broken his heart into pieces, away from the man he had once considered a brother. Anger burned like a flame in Samuel's chest, searing his sanity and consuming his pain. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white from exertion, and the veins on the backs of his hands rippled as if they were a hideous viper. His vision blurred and everything in front of him became distorted and warped, but he still drove mechanically, racing aimlessly through the streets. As time passed, the flames of anger faded, replaced by an icy, bone-piercing chill. Samuel's mind began to calm down. He realized that he couldn't just walk away. He couldn't let that pair of dogs get away with it. He was going to make them pay. He was going to make them taste the pain that he was going through. He was going to make their lives worse than death. The seed of vengeance, taking root in Samuel's heart, quickly grows into a huge tree with many branches and leaves, covering the sky. He begins to formulate a plan, a well-thought-out and cold plan for revenge. He knew that he couldn't be impulsive. He had to be careful and step by step in order to completely destroy that pair of dogs. The next day, instead of going to the office, Samuel went straight to the bank. He reached out to his personal financial advisor, a middle-aged man named Stephen with a pair of gold-rimmed glasses who looked smart and competent. Samuel has known Stephen for many years and has always trusted him. He made an unusual request of Stephen to transfer all the money in all his accounts to an offshore account in Switzerland with absolute secrecy. A flash of surprise flashed behind Stephen's lenses, but he quickly regained his composure and asked professionally, "Mr. Carter, are you sure you want to do this? It's a significant amount of money, and once it's transferred to an offshore account, it won't be so easy for you to transfer it back." Samuel's face was expressionless and his eyes were firm. "I'm sure, Stephen, do as I say. Also, this is something that I want you to keep absolutely confidential. I don't want anyone to know where this money is going, including my family." Stephen nodded in understanding. "Yes, Mr. Carter, I will follow your instructions. However, you will need to at least give me a specific account number." Samuel pulled a note out of his pocket that had been prepared long ago and handed it to Stephen. "Here's the account number. All the funds, every last cent, were transferred to this account." Stephen took the slip of paper, double-checked it, and then began to operate. Samuel sat quietly across from Stephen and watched as he skillfully tapped away on his computer, transferring his years of savings, bit by bit, to a distant, unfamiliar account. This account, like a black hole, swallowed up everything from his past and foreshadowed his future path of revenge. Having completed the transfer of funds, Samuel hoofed it back to the real estate agency. He found his exclusive agent, a young woman named Lily, who was known for her efficiency and professionalism. Samuel got right to the point and told Lily straight up, "I need you to help me sell my house. The sooner the better. Price is not an issue. I only have one requirement, and that is speed." Lily froze for a moment. She knew about Samuel's house. It was a luxury villa in a rich neighborhood. It was worth a lot of money. It was the dream house that many people dreamed of. She couldn't understand why Samuel would be so eager to make a move, and at any price. "Mr. Carter, are you sure? This house—" Samuel interrupted her. "I'm sure, Lily. I know the house is great, but I need the cash now. The sooner the better. You just need to help me find a buyer, and I'll take care of the rest." Seeing Samuel's firm attitude, Lily stopped asking questions and started contacting potential buyers. Using her contacts and resources, she quickly found a buyer for Samuel's house who was willing to take over. In Samuel's haste to get out of the house, the final sale price was well below market value, but he didn't care. All he wanted was to get out of that house as soon as possible, out of that place of lies and betrayal. Next, Samuel went to the law office and found his personal attorney, a middle-aged man named Robert, who was known in the industry for his proficiency in estate law. Samuel makes a shocking request to Robert to amend his will to leave all his property, in its entirety, to his mother, Martha, and his two children, Timothy and Emily, will not receive a penny. Robert's mouth dropped open in surprise. He couldn't believe his ears. "Mr. Carter, what do you say? You are removing Timothy and Emily from your will? How is this possible? They are your own flesh and blood." There was no expression on Samuel's face. His eyes were cold as a block of ice. "They're not my children, Robert. They're Ellie and Jack's children. Robert's face turned white as he finally realized the gravity of the situation. But, Mr. Carter, even so, you can't. Samuel interrupted again. My mind is made up, Robert. You just need to do what I ask. Also, I need you to draw up divorce papers for me. I want a divorce from Ellie. Robert sighed deeply, knowing that there was no point in saying anything else. He began drafting documents, revising the will, and preparing the divorce papers, as Samuel had requested. Samuel sat quietly across from Robert and watched his busy figure with an inexpressible thrill. He's destroying the past and building a whole new future, though the cornerstone of that future is built on revenge. After all the formalities were completed, Samuel returned to the empty house. He looked around the place that had once been filled with laughter one last time with disgust and hatred in his eyes. He walked over to Ellie's dresser, pulled open the drawer, and pulled out of it a picture of him and Ellie, taken on their anniversary, showing them, smiling so sweetly, so happily. Samuel sneered, tore the photo into pieces and threw it into the trash. Then, he took out a post-it note and wrote on it, "You two dogs, enjoy your happy life." He taped the post-it note to the mirror and left the house without looking back, leaving the place that had scarred him. Before disappearing completely, Samuel goes to see his mother, Martha. He told her everything, including Ellie's and Jack's betrayal, and how he had done it all. Martha was in tears as she listened, and she hugged Samuel tightly, sobbing uncontrollably. My child, you have suffered. Samuel gently patted his mother on the back and soothed, It's all in the past, mother. I'll be fine. Saying goodbye to his mother, Samuel disappeared completely. He cut off contact with everyone, including his family, friends, and coworkers. Like a ghost, he disappeared without a trace, as if he had never existed in the world. Ellie and Jack are in a complete panic when they realize Samuel is missing. They called and texted him frantically, but everything went stone cold with no response. Bank accounts were frozen, the house was sold, the children were disinherited, and their lives were turned upside down overnight. Panic spread like a plague between them. They began to blame each other. The once sweet and tacit understanding is gone, replaced by endless quarrels and abuse. They were like two beasts trapped in a cage, frantically tearing at each other but unable to find any way out. They don't know that all of this is just the beginning of Samuel's revenge plan, and a more brutal retaliation is still waiting for them. Samuel, on the other hand, is like a ghost hiding in the shadows, coldly watching all this, enjoying their wails of pain and feeling the thrill of revenge. 5 years, he had waited 5 years, and now it was time to go back and harvest his spoils. 5 years, like a white horse, have passed in a flash. For Samuel, these 5 years have been both a hellish ordeal and a phoenix-like rebirth. He banished himself to a distant and unfamiliar city, changed his name, and started a whole new life. He threw himself into the business world, and with his superior intelligence and tenacity, as well as his desire for revenge, he built up his business empire step by step, the scale and influence of which surpassed even everything he had ever possessed. In those 5 years, he never forgot his hatred, but he learned to bury it deep in his heart and turn it into motivation to move forward. Like a hunter, he waited patiently, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver a fatal blow to his prey. And the only person who can give him a hint of warmth is his mother, Martha. He maintains secret contact with his mother, speaking regularly on the phone and checking in with each other. Martha was his strong backbone and his moral support. She knew the pain and hatred in her son's heart, but she had never dissuaded him because she understood that there were some wounds that could only be healed with revenge. Early one morning, 5 years later, Samuel stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling city. The sunlight poured down on him, stretching his figure. He was no longer the downtrodden man he was 5 years ago. He was now a true king, standing at the pinnacle of power and wealth. He put on an expensive, hand-tailored suit and a valuable watch on his wrist, and then he dialed a familiar phone number. "Mother, I'm home," he said into the phone, his voice calm and strong. On the other end of the line, Martha's voice trembled a little. "It's good to be back, son. It's good to be back." Samuel returns to the city where he once lived, to the place of painful memories. Instead of choosing to return with great fanfare, he appeared silently like a ghost over the city, overlooking his prey. He rents a luxury penthouse apartment overlooking the entire city, including the rundown neighborhood where Ellie and Jack now live. He had all the information on them for the past 5 years through a private investigator. Ellie and Jack's life can be described as miserable. They lost the financial resources provided by Samuel, and their lives were in dire straits. Ellie had to go out to work, but she had long since gotten used to a pampered life and couldn't find any decent work at all, so she had to take odd jobs in some low-end service industry to barely make ends meet. Her beauty, which she was once proud of, has also withered rapidly under the ravages of life, turning her into a haggard, middle-aged woman. Jack's situation is worse than Ellie's. He has lost Samuel as his backer, has no skills and has to work odd jobs to make ends meet, and has developed a drinking problem. He spends his days in cheap bars, getting drunk, hanging out with a bunch of the dregs of society's underclass, and has been completely reduced to a waste of space that everyone spits on. Samuel also learns that the relationship between Ellie and Jack has long been broken. Tortured by poverty and despair, they blamed each other, hurled insults at each other, and even fought. The once love has long been crushed by the cruelty of reality, leaving only endless resentment and remorse. A complex pleasure welled up in Samuel's heart as he watched Ellie and Jack's misery. This was his long-awaited revenge, but instead of feeling the ecstasy he had imagined, he felt an indefinable emptiness and sadness. He knew that this was just the beginning. He was going to break Ellie and Jack completely. He was going to give them a taste of what it meant to live and die. A few days later, Samuel began his operation. He reveals, anonymously, to the owner of the company Ellie works for, her scandalous affair with Jack back in the day and the fact that she used Samuel's money to live an extravagant life. Soon after, Ellie was fired from the company. She lost her last job and was completely desperate. At the same time, Samuel used his influence to make Jack notorious in the industry. He exposed to the public all the unsavory deeds Jack had done back then. Jack's reputation is completely ruined, and he can no longer find any work, not even the most menial of manual labor, and no one will hire him. Samuel stood tall and watched it all with cold eyes. He watched Ellie and Jack flounder like two headless flies in a quagmire of despair, unable to find any way out. Their pain, their despair, their wailing, all turned into sustenance for Samuel's vengeance, nourishing his heart that had long been full of holes. That night, Samuel went to the cheap bar that Jack frequented. He was dressed in an elaborate suit and an expensive wristwatch that didn't fit in with his surroundings. He caught a glimpse of Jack sitting in the corner, disheveled, ragged, and dull-eyed, with a bottle of bad whiskey in his hand, which he was pouring into his mouth. Samuel walked over to Jack and sat down across from him. Jack raised his head and gave Samuel a confused look before lowering his head again and continuing to drink. His reflexes are slow, and he doesn't seem to recognize Samuel anymore. "Your old friend is here to see you, Jack." Samuel spoke, his voice low and magnetic. Jack's body jolted, and he slowly raised his head, scrutinizing Samuel with disbelief in his eyes. "S. Samuel?" He stammered, his voice hoarse as a broken gong. "How did you get here?" Samuel smiled, a hint of cruelty in his smile. "I came back to see an old friend. Can I?" Jack's face turned white as he lowered the bottle in his hand, and his body began to shake. "What do you want?" he asked, fear in his voice. "What do I want?" Samuel repeated, then put away his smile and his eyes turned cold. "I want you to live and die, Jack." Jack's body trembled even more as he tried to stand up and escape, but his legs were as heavy as lead and he couldn't listen to them. "You have ruined me. What more do you want?" He cried out in desperation. "Destroy you?" Samuel sneered. "No, Jack, I haven't even started yet. I'm going to make you lose everything. I'm going to make you taste the pain I went through back then. I'm going to make you regret coming into this world." With that said, Samuel stood up and looked at Jack condescendingly, with contempt and hatred in his eyes. He turned and left the bar, leaving Jack sitting there paralyzed and shivering like an abandoned wild dog, awaiting his fate. Over the next few days, Samuel picks up the pace of his revenge. He uses his power and wealth to push Ellie and Jack over the edge. Ellie has been evicted from her rental home by her landlord and is living on the streets. Jack was taken to jail by the police for being drunk and disorderly. They have completely lost hope in life and have become the most humble and pitiful ants in the city. And Samuel's mother, Martha, is always by his side. She witnessed how her son carried out his revenge plan step by step and saw the tragic end of Ellie and Jack. She understood her son's pain and supported his decision, because she knew that this was the justice Samuel deserved and the best thing that could have happened to that broken family. On a sunny afternoon, Samuel takes Martha to a cemetery in the countryside. Here Samuel's father is buried, a man who died when he was very young. Samuel lays a bouquet of flowers at his father's grave and then stands quietly for a moment. "Father, I came to see you," he said softly. "I did, and I did you, myself, and the family, justice." Martha stood behind Samuel and patted him gently on the shoulder. "You've done well, son. Your father would be proud of you in heaven." Samuel turned around and looked at his mother's kind face, a warmth welling up in his heart. For the past 5 years, he had lived in hatred, never really feeling happy. But now, he can finally let go of the baggage in his heart and start a new life. He knows that revenge won't bring him true happiness, but it will allow him to let go of the past and start over. "Mother, let's go home," Samuel said. Martha nodded, a long-awaited smile on her face. She knew that her son, at last, had come out of the shadows and into the light, and those who have hurt them will eventually pay for their actions and spend the rest of their lives in remorse and pain. This, then, is the best possible ending. The flame of revenge, which has been burning in Samuel's heart for 5 years, has finally reached its final moment of reckoning. He orchestrated a final confrontation, one that would be enough to completely break Ellie and Jack. He chose to conduct this final trial in the house they once owned together, now foreclosed and remodeled. By some means he had lured Ellie and Jack separately, and Martha, as a witness to it all, accompanied him. As Ellie and Jack are each brought to the house, which is both familiar and unfamiliar, a look of confusion and unease crosses their faces. They didn't realize that the other party would also appear here, not to mention what kind of fate would await them. Samuel stood in the center of the living room, his back to them, his posture erect, like a king in control. Martha, meanwhile, stood beside him, looking at the two once familiar faces with complicated eyes. "You're here." Samuel spoke slowly, his voice low and magnetic, echoing in the empty room with a chilling majesty. Ellie and Jack's bodies shook when they heard the voice, and they slowly turned around to see Samuel standing in front of them. After not seeing him for 5 years, he had completely changed, no longer the gentle, generous man they remembered, but a stranger who exuded a powerful aura and a sense of oppression. "Samuel?" Ellie's voice trembled with a hint of disbelief and fear. "How did you get here?" Jack stood behind Ellie, his face pale, his lips opening and closing, but unable to say a word. Samuel slowly turned around with a cold smile on his face. "Why can't I be here? This used to be my home. Do I still need to report to you when I go back to my own home?" His eyes were like swords, sweeping over Ellie and Jack's faces and sending shivers down their spines. "Didn't you? You didn't. You disappear?" Jack stammered, his eyes averted, afraid to look Samuel in the eye. "Disappear?" Samuel sneered. "I just went somewhere you couldn't find me and thought things over. Now, I've figured it out, so I'm back." Ellie's tears came to her eyes as she stepped forward and tried to grab Samuel's arm. "Samuel, I know we're sorry. We were wrong. Please forgive us, okay? We can start over." Samuel shook Ellie's hand away violently, his eyes filled with disgust and contempt. "Forgiveness? Start over? Ellie, do you think that's possible? You ruined everything for me. You ruined my family. You ruined my life. And now you're telling me to forgive? Do you deserve it?" Ellie took a few steps backward at Samuel's roar, and she dropped to the floor, covering her face as she cried out in pain. I know. I know we deserve to die. But, but we had no choice. She choked out, Jack, he's always been good to me. I, I got confused for a moment. A moment of confusion? Samuel's voice rose steeply with a hint of madness. Your momentary confusion ruined 18 years of my marriage, destroyed my child. Do you know that because of your momentary confusion, Timothy and Emily, they? Samuel's voice choked as he took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. They hate me. They hate me as a father. They won't even recognize me. Hearing this, Martha couldn't hold back any longer. She stepped forward, pointed at Ellie and Jack's noses, and angrily rebuked, You two brutes! You ruined my son's life. You have ruined this family. Has your conscience been eaten by dogs? Jack kept his head down, afraid to speak, letting Martha's spittle spray in his face. Ellie, on the other hand, cried and laughed like a madwoman, mumbling, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Please, forgive me. Samuel looked at the two men in front of him without an ounce of pity in his heart. He walked over to Ellie and crouched down, cupping her chin in his hand and forcing her to look up at him. Ellie, do you remember what you told me back then? You said you loved me. You said you'd always be there for me. You said you'd be a good wife, a good mother. But what about you? What have you done? Ellie's eyes were hollow and tears kept pouring out of her eyes and wetting her face. I was wrong. I was really wrong, she mumbled, repeating, like a repeater, the words. Samuel sneered, releasing Ellie's jaw and standing up, walking over to Jack. He looked condescendingly at the man he once considered a brother, his eyes filled with contempt and disdain. Jack, what about you? Do you have anything to say? Jack looked up at Samuel with fear and despair in his eyes. Samuel, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, he said, with difficulty. But I really love Ellie. I can't help myself. Can't control yourself? Samuel laughed back in anger. So you betrayed your brother, stole his wife, and destroyed his family? That's your can't help yourself? Jack lowered his head, not daring to look Samuel in the eye again. I know I deserve to die. But I'm begging you, let Ellie go. She's innocent. Innocent? Samuel laughed up in the air like he'd heard the funniest joke in the world. Jack, you're actually saying Ellie's innocent? She's the least innocent person in the world. Together with you, she ruined everything for me with her own hands. You're all executioners. You all deserve to go to hell. Samuel's roar echoed through the room, shaking Ellie and Jack to their core. They had never seen Samuel like this before. He was like a demon that had crawled out of hell and reeked of fear. Samuel. Martha walked over to Samuel and gently took his hand. That's enough, son. Let them go. Samuel looked at his mother. A struggle flashed in his eyes, but he finally nodded. Okay, mother. I'll do as you say. He turned and looked at Ellie and Jack. You guys go away and never show yourselves to me again. Otherwise, I don't know what I'll do. Ellie and Jack were as if they had been pardoned. They rolled up from the floor, helped each other, and stumbled out of the room. Before leaving, Ellie looked back at Samuel, her eyes full of despair and remorse. But Samuel did not look at her again. His eyes has been completely cold, like a piece of ice that does not melt for 10,000 years. A dead silence fell over the room after Ellie and Jack left. Martha walked over to Samuel's side and sighed softly. Son, do you hate them? She asked. Samuel was silent for a long time, then slowly shook his head. I don't know, Mother. I used to hate them to the bone, to break them into pieces. But now, I just feel tired, very tired and tired. Martha looked at her son with heartache. She knew that in these 5 years, Samuel's heart must have endured pain and suffering that was unimaginable to normal people. It's over, son. Everything is over. She gently patted Samuel's back and comforted. You still have me. You still have Timothy and Emily. We will always be by your side. Timothy and Emily. Samuel's eyes dimmed. Will they? They still recognize me as their father? They will, son. They will. Martha said firmly, "They're just momentarily blinded by Ellie. When they're older, they'll understand." Samuel let out a bitter laugh. "I hope so." He turned around and walked over to the window, looking out at the bustling city with a blank stare. He had won this revenge, but he had lost so much more. He didn't know what his future path should be. All he knew was that he needed time. Time to heal, time to find himself again. Martha walked over to Samuel and gently leaned on his shoulder. "Son, whatever you decide, Mother will support you." She whispered, "You will always be my pride." Samuel held his mother's hand tightly as a warmth welled up in his heart. He knew that no matter what happened, he was not alone. He still had his mother. He still had his family. That was enough. The confrontation, like a storm, came and went as quickly as it did. Ellie and Jack disappeared from Samuel's world completely, and with endless remorse and pain, they went on to their own tragic end. Samuel, on the other hand, begins the long road of self-redemption in the company of his mother. He knows that the road will be difficult, but he must go on, for himself and for those who have loved him and those he has loved. There is no winner in this revenge, only endless hurt and regret. But at least, justice was served and the sin was punished. And Samuel, too, can finally put down the baggage in his heart to find the piece of light that belongs to himself. As the dust settles, Samuel stands at the starting point of his new life and looks back at the past years filled with hurt and revenge. He finally let go of the burden of hatred and let go of himself. Those betrayals and injuries that once caused him so much pain have all turned into clouds of smoke and dissipated in the river of time. Today, Samuel has a successful career and a happy family, surrounded by his new wife Emma, whom he loves dearly, and his mother Martha. They live in a mansion at the top of the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It is a place filled with love, trust, and hope, unlike the home that was once filled with lies and betrayal. Emma is a beautiful, intelligent, and independent woman with dazzling blonde hair and turquoise eyes, as warm and dazzling as the brightest sunshine in spring. She met Samuel at a business cocktail party, when Samuel, who had just completed his revenge plan, exuded a cold and charming temperament. Emma was attracted by his unique charm. And Samuel, too, was impressed by Emma's sincerity and kindness. They fell in love, no sensational romance, only the warmth of a long and slow flow of water. Emma knew Samuel's past, but she never mentioned it, but just quietly accompanied him with her love and gentleness to soothe the scars of his innermost being. With Emma's companionship, Samuel gradually steps out of the shadow of the past and learns to love and believe again. Their wedding was simple and cozy, inviting only their closest family and friends, and Martha looked at the happy smiles on her son and daughter-in-law's faces, her eyes filled with relief and joy. She knew that her son had finally found his happiness, and she herself could finally let go of the heavy burden in her heart and enjoy her old age in peace. The married life is calm and sweet. Samuel devotes more energy to his career, while Emma continues to pursue her dream of becoming an accomplished painter. They support each other, encourage each other, grow together, and become the most important people in each other's lives. One evening, Samuel and Emma were on the balcony enjoying the sunset when Emma gently snuggled into Samuel's arms and softly asked, "Samuel, do you still hate them?" Samuel wrapped his arms around Emma and was silent for a moment, then slowly shook his head. "No more hate, Emma. It's too tiring to hate someone. I just want to cherish the life I have now, and with you, grow old." Emma lifted her head and looked into Samuel's eyes, which were filled with tenderness and love, no longer shadowed by hatred. "That's good," she whispered, a happy smile on her face. Just then, Samuel's cell phone rang. He picked up the phone, saw the caller ID, froze for a moment, and then picked up the call. "Hello?" On the other end of the line came a familiar and unfamiliar voice. "Samuel, it's me." Samuel's body stiffened slightly as he heard the voice. It was Ellie. He took a deep breath and asked calmly, "What can I do for you?" "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. To you." Ellie's voice choked and broke. I know it's too late for me to say anything, but I still want to say it to you in person. I'm sorry." Samuel was silent for a moment, then slowly said, I don't hate you anymore, Ellie. Let bygones be bygones, and I hope you can let go of the past and live your life too. On the other end of the phone, Ellie sobbed, Thank you, Samuel. Thank you. Samuel hung up the phone, an unspeakable feeling welling up in his heart. He knew that this was the last goodbye between him and Ellie, and a complete goodbye to his past. Emma took Samuel's hand and asked softly, Who called? A deceased person. Samuel smiled and wrapped his arms around Emma tighter. Let's go inside. It's getting a little chilly out there. They turned and walked into the room, the warmth of the light spilling over them, stretching their silhouettes. Samuel knew that his life had turned a new page, and that this page would be written with happiness and hope. A few days later, Samuel took Emma and Martha with him to the cemetery to visit his father. They laid a bouquet of flowers at his father's grave and then stood in silence for a while. Father, I came to see you. Samuel said softly, I'm doing well, don't worry. Martha stood beside Samuel and patted him gently on the shoulder. Your father would be happy for you in heaven, son. Emma held Samuel's hand and silently accompanied him. She knew that in Samuel's heart, there were still some wounds that hadn't completely healed, but he was trying hard to move forward, and she would always be by his side and together with him. Walk through every spring, summer, fall, and winter in the future. As he left the cemetery, Samuel looked back at his father's tombstone with gratitude and nostalgia. He knew that although his father was gone, the love and courage he had left him would always be with him, guiding him on his way. Back home, Samuel stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the beautiful city, his heart filled with hope and longing. He knows that there is still a long road ahead, but he is no longer afraid because he has love, trust, and a warm home. He turned around and looked at Emma, who was busy in the kitchen, and Martha, who was sitting in the living room reading the newspaper, with a happy smile on her face. He knew that this was the life he wanted, simple and beautiful, calm and happy. He walked over and hugged Emma gently, whispering in her ear, Thank you, Emma, for coming to me. Emma hugged Samuel back, resting her head against his chest and whispered, I want to thank you too, Samuel, for letting me be a part of your life. Martha looked at the two people embracing each other, and a kind smile appeared on her face. She knew that her son, at last, had found the happiness that belonged to him, and she, at last, could let go of everything in her heart and enjoy this hard-won heavenly happiness. The sunlight poured into the room, coloring everything with a golden glow, and Samuel's life, like the sunlight, was warm and bright, full of hope and light. He knew that there would be storms and challenges in the days to come, but he was no longer afraid because he had love, trust, and a warm home. This, then, is enough. He hugged Emma tightly as if he were hugging the whole world. He knew that he had found his own happiness, and this happiness would be with him forever until the end of his life. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.